Hi, I'm going to continue on with the discussion of HTML, and in this video I'm going to be looking specifically at how we create tables, lists, and I'll also show you just a little bit about another language that's used with HTML called CSS, and specifically we'll look at a couple of examples of inline CSS. So if you recall from the last video, I had a web page that I created, example1.htm, and I'm going to back up just a quick second here. I'm going to close this up. Recall from last video that I created a folder, and I named the folder in such a way that it would identify me and identify the fact that this is going to be the folder that's used to store my web pages for my website. So I'm calling it CB Web. And if I open that folder, immediately inside of it I see the HTML pages that make up my website, and I also see a nested folder called pics that contains pictures that I might want to use, and I'm organizing things in this manner so that I'm able to keep the pictures separated from the web pages. So just the way I prefer to organize things, and I would suggest for your project that you do the same thing. Alright, so last time I created a web page, example1.htm, used Notepad to create that. And once the web page is created, then if I open it with the browser, as I'm doing right now, you'll notice that the browser interprets the HTML code and renders the image that we saw last time. Now, I've added to this a little bit. So last time there was a hyperlink on this page that would link to another page, and since then I have developed the content of that page. So that's different, and we're going to look at the content of this page. And I've also included, I think last time there was a hyperlink to Anderson University's website. So again, you can see that this is a external hyperlink, and nothing has really changed from last time on that. I've added another link, and this one contains an example that was provided by my friend Stephen Cavender, and so I've tried to give him his credit at the beginning, and this is showing a couple of things. A example of a table, and embedded in that table is a ordered list, the items with the numbers preceding them, and nested within the ordered list in some places is an unordered list, the items that you see with the bullet points. And so within the table he has a nested list structure, and he's also using this complementary language called CSS, Cascading Style Sheets, to do some additional formatting, put a border around the table, and some things of that nature. So we'll look at the details of that at the very end of this video. So a lot to be covered here, and let's go ahead and return back to the first page and follow the hyperlink to example 2. So this is the page that we're going to analyze in detail here. So let me start out by showing you, the features that I've used, describe the features that I've used, and then we'll actually analyze the program code and see how that's done. So I have a heading at the top, and that's actually being done using an H1 tag in the body section of the page. And following it, I have a picture that I copied from the internet, and then I put an additional heading beneath it. And you'll notice that the heading at the very top, the picture, and this subheading are all centered with respect to the left and right sides of the document window. And then below that there's a little bit of open space and another heading, And then what's not real clear here is that I've used a table, and if I highlight it, it's a little bit more clear in that you can see that there are 4 rows and that there are 2 columns on each row, and you can see where the columns are separated there with the white space. So in Stephen Cavender's example, he's going to show how to create a table, and he's also going to show how a border can be placed around the cells, and it'll be more obvious when you look at his example as to how many rows and how many columns the table has. Then following that, I have a ordered list, okay, and within the ordered list, one of the items is serving as a hyperlink. So I'm going to combine a couple of things that we've that we're doing here. Use the idea of a list item and a hyperlink in combination. So let's look at the program code and see how all this came about. So I'm going to attempt to open the source code behind this page and keep this page open. And if I right click on the open document window, I get a pop-up menu with an option to view page source. And when I do, I'm going to have to try to adjust this window so that it allows me to see as much of the page as possible while at the same time seeing as much of the code as possible. So I'll just kind of mess around with this until I get it the way I want it. And I'm going to scroll the actual window up a little bit, and then let's see whether or not I can bring this all up together. All right, so looking at the actual source code, then I have my doc type tag at the very beginning, which tells the browser that we're using the current standard HTML, which in this case is HTML5. The web page begins with the opening HTML tag, and we have the head section, and it's developed, as minimally as I can, which means that I am specific in identifying the encoding scheme that I want to use with a meta tag, and I also have a title section so that on my web page up here where I'm pointing, the title will show up, and then sometimes that's used by search engines as well, so it can lead someone who's searching for a topic through a search engine to find your page. There's some other tricks that you can use in the head section as well, but I'm not going to get into it in this class. So the head section is a necessary part that follows immediately after the opening HTML tag. And in the head section, again, I can have a title section. I can also have JavaScript, should I want to use JavaScript in my web page, but that's an option and it's not a requirement. And I can also include CSS rules, and if I opt to do that, I'll be using what's called internal CSS. I always get these names confused. So there's actually 3 types of CSS that can be used. Inline, which we'll take a look at today, internal, which we'll look at very shortly within a week, and external CSS, which is really the preferred way to do it, and we'll look at that as a final CSS topic. So for now, just understand that this head section is very minimal, but later on we'll come back to it and we'll do some additional things with it. Most of the content of the web page is going to be in the body section. So the body section follows the head section. And again, in the example that I have created, I wanted to take a heading at the very top, a picture, and a subheading, and center it. And so in order to do that, using HTML5, I have to introduce something called a div tag, which allows you to create a division or a boundary area within your body section. So this is just kind of a logical boundary, and that logical boundary should be whatever is needed to surround the code that needs to be centered. And within the div tag, I'm using an inline CSS rule. Now, I really don't want to spend any time at all talking about CSS at the moment, because it's a separate issue, and I want to stay focused on HTML. But in previous versions of HTML, that would be XHTML and HTML4 and so forth, there was a tag that could be used to surround other HTML tags that you wanted to have centered, and conveniently enough, that tag was called the center tag. And with the new standard of HTML, that tag has been made obsolete. It is now what's known as a deprecated tag, and in order to write this HTML so that it conforms to the current standard, so that it can be guaranteed to render the desired image on the client's computer, I want to make sure that I'm writing the code so it's in compliance with the current standard of HTML. So I've been forced, more or less, here to, in order to accomplish this, to introduce this CSS rule. So this looks an awful lot like a attribute, but it's not, and then we'll come back and look at CSS in more detail, and maybe come back and analyze this further in a subsequent video. But for now, just understand that I'm using this div tag, and within it is something that looks like an attribute, but it's not. It's actually using a rule that's being written in this supplemental language called CSS. And this rule is, as you might suggest, causing the content that follows to be centered. Okay, so what is centered? Well, there is a heading. Okay, so I'm using an H1 tag in order to get large block style print. And following that, I want the little white space, so I am throwing in paragraph tags. And following that, I have an image. Okay, so this is something that I copied from the internet, and I have the picture stored in the embedded folder called pics. So relative to this page, in order to get to this source picture, I have to open the pics folder, and then there's a file called hound.jpg. There's a graphics file, hound.jpg, that's being imported. And as was mentioned previously, with the image tag, there is the requirement to use a alt attribute, and in the event that the picture doesn't load, there will be a rectangular graphic inserted, and beneath that graphic will be whatever text you happen to put in. So that should be meaningful text. And then I also mentioned that if the web page is being used by someone with a visual handicap, using some software that reads the web page to them, some text to audio translation software, since the picture won't be anything that the person listening to the text can pick up on, the alt tag information will be read to them instead. And so I create a break to force what occurs next, which would be the subtitle, to appear on a separate line, and then another break tag, just so that I'm assured that whatever follows is pushed further down vertically on the document window. And at that point, I close the div tag, so everything that's highlighted is going to be affected by the centering. All right, so what happens next? Well, the next part of this is there will be a heading, and since we're outside of the div tag, then the default alignment will be left alignment, so it aligns to the left. A block style print, but it's smaller than the H1 tag that was used to create the heading at the very top of the page. So I have a heading, and beneath that I create a structure called a table. Okay, so what is a table? Well, you may have used tables in Microsoft Word. It's simply a structure that allows you to specify a grid, and you can specify how many rows you want, how many columns you have per row. So in this case, I'm going to have a structure with 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. Count them: 1, 2, 3, 4. And on each row, I'm going to have 2 columns. So my rows are created within the table structure using TR tags, and within each row, I create a column using a TD tag. Okay, so someone asked me recently, what does a TR tag stand for? And I said table row, and they said, well, then what does a TD tag stand for? And I said table data, I think. So, you know, why they didn't name that TC as in table column, I don't know, or RC as in row column, I don't know. But the TD tag, nevertheless, is the way you're going to create a column within a table. And it's done in, you know, the following hierarchy. You create the rows ahead of the columns. So you just have to remember that. So everything that you see highlighted right now relates to row 1. We'll go over here and analyze. So on row 1, in the first column, the leftmost column, I'm going to see the text 513 through 616, 513 through 616. Okay, and again, that's coming from this part of the HTML. And then immediately to the right, after that column ends with this closing TD tag, we're still on the same row. There's an opening TD tag, which starts the second column on the first row. And within it, within the opening TD and the closing TD tags, I have the text that reads CPSC 1100 online. And then the first row ends with the closing TR tag, and that is the extent of the entire first row. Okay, so if you see how that works, I just repeat the same kind of thing for the second row and the third row and so forth. So I think that should be fairly straightforward. And when the table is done, then table is done at this point, then the next thing I do is create a little vertical spacing and use the H4 tag to create some block style bold print that serves as another heading right here, and it introduces the next structure, which is an ordered list. Okay, so let's take a look and see how this ordered list is constructed. It's not difficult. I'm going to move this over just a little bit now and expand the size of the window so that we can see everything, and going to be pushing the limits here space-wise. Okay, not going to quite get it fitted in there, but I'll scroll whenever it's necessary. All right, so my ordered list is going to get down here a little bit. My ordered list is going to begin right here where it says 1. Okay, so how do I start the ordered list structure? I start it with an OL tag, and I'll let you think long and hard what OL might mean. And then for each line item, I use an LI tag. I use a pair of LI tags, opening and closing LI tags. So within the ordered list, the li tag is going to take its directive from this ol tag and generate a number. So the numbers that you see out here are automatically created. You don't have to, and you don't want to try to type the numbers in yourself. And so I put in whatever text I want on the first line, close off the li tag, and then put in another opening li tag, which creates the second row. And in this one I did something just a little bit different. Instead of just putting in text, I put in a hyperlink with a hyperlink reference to some URL that I browsed to and copied from my browser address line. And then following that opening a tag, which is the beginning of hyperlink, I have the text that I want to associate the hyperlink link on, which is trip to Yellowstone. So you see trip to Yellowstone right here. And then following that, I close the a tag and close the li tag, and that's it for the second item in the ordered list. And then I start the third item, which is again just text, and likewise the third or the fourth and the fifth. And then the ordered list ends with the closing ol tag, and at that point the web page is done. So I close the body and close the HTML tag, and that's that. So that is an analysis of this example 2 page, and at this point then I would expect you to have a little bit of an understanding of how we're going to make content centered on the web page. And for that, with the new standard of HTML, I have to introduce some CSS, and the way I've chosen to introduce it initially is the least preferred way, and that is to use inline CSS. So I again won't go into too much detail with CSS at the moment, other than to just point out that I had to use some supplemental language to accomplish the effect that I wanted, and then I get back into just standard HTML in order to create the table and the ordered list that you see. Okay, so hopefully that's understood. In the second part of this video, I want to look at the web page that Stephen Cavender has created, and it creates a more complex table, actually integrates a table and a list into a common structure, and it also uses a variation of the list that we saw previously called an unordered list. So again, his structure that he's created is a lot more complicated, more complex, should I say. And it also uses some CSS that we haven't seen before. So let me go ahead and start things here with example 1, and I'll open with my browser, and I'll go ahead and follow the hyperlink. And what we see is that we have a heading and subheading at the top that's centered, and then we have this complex structure that is left aligned. And you might imagine what's going on here if you followed what was going on in the previous part of the video. I have a div set up that's controlling these two titles, the two headings, and I'm using an H1 tag for the top line and an H3 or H4 tag, I can't remember, for the second line. In both cases, it's going to create bold block style print. The heading tag is going to throw a line return after it concludes. So all those things are just standard characteristics of the heading tags or the H tags. But I want to focus on this structure, and what you see here is a table with 2 rows and 3 columns. And what's different is there's a border, so there's an overall border around the table. That's the big bold border, and then around most of the columns there is a border, the exception being the first column on the second row. And within the column borders there, there's some variation. So the first column is not as, the border on it is not as wide as the second column, and the border on the third column is the same width as the border on the first column. So you can see all those things just by inspecting it. And let's see, is there anything else? Yes, before we get started, I want to point out that in column 3 on each row, there's a complex list structure where we have within a column, within a row of a table, we have a ordered list, and within one part of the ordered list, we have an unordered list where you see the bullet points. That's an example of an unordered list. So really, again, we're integrating a number of these structural features to create something that is pretty powerful. And let's take a look at how that is actually accomplished. So I'm going to right-click here on the Open Document window and View Page Source. And the code that you see from the doc type down through the closing head sections, just routine stuff that can be copied and pasted at this point. When the body section begins, there is a div that I use in the way that was described in the previous part of the video to do some centering. And then we get into the table structure. So this is what I want you to see, and this table has a width attribute that's been declared to be 400 pixels wide, and he is using inline CSS to control the border. So the border is controlled by CSS rather than by a border attribute. Okay, in previous versions of HTML there was a border attribute. Now that is being done with CSS. So within the first row of the table, so if we look down here on the first row, it spans all the program code that you see highlighted. And on that first row, we see that there are 1, 2, 3 columns. And the first 2 columns are pretty minimal in terms of content, and then that third column has a lot going on in it. Okay, so you can see the effect that occurs from this code being executed, and at a glance it's apparent that there's a lot of stuff going on, and consequently a lot of code to create it. All right, so we have with inline CSS a style being assigned to each of the columns. And so in the first case we have a border that's 1 pixel wide, and then in the second case we have a border that's 3 pixels wide. And there's some keywords here: solid, I can't remember, it may be dash, dotted, I can't remember. We'll look at the details of that later on. But we can specify things like the line attribute, whether it's solid, dashed, or dotted. We can also specify a color, so it doesn't necessarily have to be black. And there's some additional CSS rules that could be applied as well to control the back color and some other things. But each one of these columns has its own CSS rule applied. And you'll see that I have the same rule being applied on this table 4 times over. Border 1 pixel solid black, border 1 pixel solid black. It's occurring, okay, I'm not telling you the truth. It's occurring 1, 2, 3 times. But nevertheless, that same rule is being applied 3 times. It's 3 times that code has to be entered in, and the rule for making the border 3 pixels wide is applied 2 times over. Okay, now I just want to point out that the major problem associated with inline CSS is that the rules are very narrowly scoped, and consequently if you want to do the same thing in multiple places, then you have to rewrite the program code over and over again. When we eventually look at internal CSS, and especially so with external CSS, we're going to see that we can apply those rules in a much broader way, and we'll be able to write the rule one time instead of multiple times, and we'll be able to invoke it, call it up as many times as we need to. So write once, call it up many, and that's going to be the way things work as we look at improved ways of doing this. But for now, just want to call to your attention that in fact we are applying CSS, inline CSS, in order to affect the border around both the table itself and the columns within the table. And if you look at the second row, so the second row would begin here, and on the first column there is no CSS rule being applied in regards to the border. So consequently it's defaulting to a border of no color and a line thickness of 0 pixels, so no border. All right, now if you shift your attention here to the third column, and the way this is written for row 1 is exactly the same way it's written for row 2. So if you understand what's going on in this, let's say, third column of row 1, then you automatically know what's going on here because it's just duplicate code. But let's take a look at what's going on. Okay, so what I have is a list structure being generated, and on that very first line to start the list, the outermost level of indentation here is numbered, whereas the inner level of indentation is bulleted. So the outermost structure is being announced here with this opening OL tag, and notice something kind of subtle. After the opening OL tag, he just puts in the text list, and the text list appears right here. Now the actual ordered list is beginning at this point. Okay, and get back to this. In order to then create text that has a number associated with it, the ordered list requires the combined use of the LI, or the line item tag. So in order to, list item tag. So the list item tag, the LI tag, is what actually creates either a numbered or a bulleted entry on each line. And so the first LI tag is going to take its directive from the nearest either OL or UL tag, in which case it finds a OL tag that's open, and therefore the highlighted line of code is going to automatically number that item, that line that is inserting, with a number 1. So the number 1's not actually included in the code. Then that whatever text that is chosen is inserted after the opening tag and before the closing tag. And then when the next LI tag occurs, again, it's taking its directive from the nearest open either OL or UL tag, and it sees that it's the second line item or list item that's being inserted under the directive of the same OL tag, so it numbers that with a 2, and then it does the same thing again with slightly different text, so you can sort of see where you're at right there. And notice something kind of subtle is that this LI tag is left open before the UL tag is inserted. Okay, so this is kind of subtle. These two lines of code are something you need to pay attention to. The UL tag then, under the directive of this open li tag, has the effect of causing these next three li tags to take its directive from the UL tag and precede each line that's inserted with a bullet point. And then the UL tag ends, and then when this next li tag occurs, I'm sorry, the li tag ends the unordered list. Okay, so get to that point again. Let's see. Okay, here we are. Sorry about the pause. This is where the indentation, had I indented it a little bit more cleanly, it would have made analyzing this code a lot easier. But that line right there closes. Okay, so this is the beginning of the li that is being closed right here. Okay, so you need to analyze those details. And again, the indentation would have made this much easier to read had I chosen to do that. So beyond that, then the next li tag is going to take its directive from not the ul tag, because the ul tag is closed at this point. It's going to take its directive from the ol tag, and it's going to cause a 4 to be inserted ahead of the li, or ahead of the line that's being inserted. And then finally, the ol tag ends and the td tag ends, and we've just concluded the last column in the first row, at which point the first row ends with the tr tag. And if you followed all of that, the same thing is going to happen on the second row, the only difference being that on the second row there is no inline CSS associated with that first column, and therefore the border defaults to a border thickness of 0. Okay, and after the table ends, that's it for the web page really. So there's a closing body tag, there's a closing HTML tag, and that is that. So you've seen that we can use what we know about tables and lists, and now what we know about unordered list, both ordered and unordered list. We can use them in a variety of combinations to achieve, many different kinds of unique effects. And the way to, really grasp this is to look at my example code, follow very closely this example and the previous example, and so that should, make it very clear how to use tables and lists. The other thing that I, want to keep hammering away at is that we can do certain things with HTML, and there are certain things that we can't do, like controlling the borders on tables and the centering of text and so forth. And so as we want to create, better web pages where we want to, be able to exert a little bit more control over the formatting, it's becoming more and more apparent that we're going to have to do things that go beyond HTML. So you can anticipate, my introducing CSS very shortly, and then also be aware that there are 3 different ways to serve up CSS, either inline or internal or external, and we'll look at the details of that as we cover the material here over the next few lectures. All right, study the details, and hope you enjoyed the video.